pastel yellow balloons squeezed together against the ceiling like suffocating egg yolks. My sister Bridget was laughing, a high, scraping sound, telling 30 women I was destined to die alone. I was halfway through a tepid mimosa when the heavy oak doors opened, and a man holding a toddler shattered her perfect life. The country club smelled like expensive desperation. It was a cloying mixture of catered, poached salmon, dying eucalyptus arrangements, and the sugary, suffocating scent of vanilla buttercream. I sat at a table near the back, tracing the condensation on my glass of cheap Prosecco. My fingernails were bitten down to the quick. At the front of the room, seated in a massive rattan chair that looked like a prop from a bad tropical movie, was my younger sister, Bridget. She wore a tight, white maternity dress that clung to her perfectly round stomach. She looked like a fertility goddess carved from marble and Botox. Everything about Bridget was curated. Her hair was styled in loose, beachy waves that took 3 hours to achieve. Her smile was practiced, showing just enough teeth to look genuine, but not enough to wrinkle her eyes. Beside her stood Aaron, her husband. Aaron wore a pastel blue linen suit and had the soft, uncalloused hands of a man who managed hedge funds and paid other people to mow his lawn. He looked at Bridget like she was a prize racehorse. I took a sip of my drink. It was warm. We were in the middle of the third baby shower game. This one involved sniffing melted candy bars smeared inside newborn diapers to guess the brand. It was visceral, gross, and completely at odds with the crystal chandeliers hanging above us. My mother, Diane, was fluttering around the tables, her heavy perfume heavy on the gardenia, lingering like a threat. "Oh, Chloe, you aren't even trying," my mother said, pausing behind my chair, her hand clamped down on my shoulder, her rings dug into my collarbone. "I have a weak stomach, Mom," I said, not looking up. "You have a sour attitude," she corrected, her voice dropping to a hiss so the Pilates moms at the next table wouldn't hear. "Smile. Today is about your sister." Today was always about my sister. The games mercifully ended. A waiter with tired eyes began clearing the chocolate-smeared diapers, dropping them into a black plastic bin. The clatter of forks against porcelain resumed. Bridget tapped a manicured fingernail against a crystal champagne flute. The sharp clink, clink, clink cut through the chatter. The room went quiet. 30 women turned their faces toward the rattan throne. "I just want to say thank you," Bridget began, her voice breathy, projected perfectly through the small microphone Aaron handed her. "To all of you, it takes a village, right?" A murmur of agreeable laughter rippled through the room. "Arin and I we are so blessed. We have this beautiful home, this beautiful life, and now this little angel on the way." She patted her stomach. Aaron kissed her temple. It was nauseatingly picturesque. "And I want to give a special shout out to my big sister Chloe," Bridget said. My stomach dropped, a heavy, cold stone settling in my gut. I froze, the Prosecco glass halfway to my mouth. The heads pivoted toward me. I forced the corners of my mouth up. "Stand up, Chloe," Bridget coaxed. I didn't want to. My chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor as I pushed back. I stood. The air conditioning suddenly felt freezing against my bare arms. "Chloe has been such a help with the planning," Bridget said. A lie. I had stuffed some envelopes. "You know, people always ask me if I worry about Chloe. 34, still in that tiny apartment, still. Fiercely independent." She paused. The word independent hung in the air, a thinly veiled substitute for unwanted. A few women offered sympathetic, tight-lipped smiles. "I used to pray for her to find someone," Bridget continued, her tone dripping with mock empathy. "But I've realized maybe marriage just isn't for everyone. Some women are meant to be the quirky aunt. And that's okay. We can't all have the fairy tale, right? And frankly, at her age, it's best she's given up the hunt. The eggs aren't getting any younger." Laughter erupted. It wasn't polite chuckling. It was loud, genuine laughter, the kind that validates a bully. My mother was laughing, covering her mouth with a napkin. Aaron chuckled, shaking his head. I stood there. My face felt hot, a slow burn creeping up my neck. I didn't cry. I rarely cried anymore. Instead, a familiar, exhaustion-laced cynicism washed over me. This was Bridget. This was who she was. She couldn't just have the spotlight. She had to pull someone else into the dark to make her light seem brighter. I looked at her. Her eyes met mine. There was a cruel, triumphant glint in them. She fed on this. I slowly raised my glass to her in a mock toast, drank the rest of the warm Prosecco, and sat down. The seat felt hard. The room buzzed with renewed conversation. The tension I felt completely ignored by the pastel-clad crowd. I stared at the door, calculating if I could slip out, grab my coat from the coat check, and catch a taxi before my mother noticed. I was leaning forward, about to make my move, when the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall didn't just open. They swung inward with a loud, hollow thud that bounced off the high ceilings. The sound was jarring enough to stop the string quartet in the corner mid-bow. A cello groaned out of tune and fell silent. The chatter died, not instantly, but in a rapid wave, like a television being turned down. I turned in my chair. Standing in the doorway was a man. He didn't belong here. That was the first undeniable fact. In a sea of linen, silk, and carefully curated pastels, he looked like a storm cloud. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded olive-green canvas jacket that looked damp from the rain outside. His work boots were scuffed and caked with dried mud. He smelled of ozone, wet asphalt, and stale tobacco. I could smell him from 3 tables away. But it wasn't the man that sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was what he was holding. Resting on his hip was a little boy, maybe 3 years old. The kid had a head full of unruly, dark curls and was clutching a stuffed rabbit, missing one of its button eyes. The boy was wearing a bright red rain jacket, the plastic squeaking slightly as he shifted his weight. Silence blanketed the room. It was thick, heavy, and incredibly uncomfortable. You could hear the hum of the industrial refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall. The man didn't look at the crowd. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping past the balloon arches, the towering gift pile, the confused faces of the country club elite. His gaze tracked like a searchlight. Then he found the front of the room. He found the rattan chair. I looked back at Bridget. The transformation was violent. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she was going to faint. The smug, flushed glow of the glowing mother-to-be vanished, replaced by an ashen, sickly gray. Her perfect manicured hands gripped the arms of the rattan chair with such force that her knuckles turned white. I could see a subtle tremor in her fingers. A drop of sweat formed near her hairline. She stopped breathing, I could tell. Her chest, which had been rising and falling beneath the white maternity dress, went completely still. Aaron noticed her reaction before he processed the man at the door. He frowned, leaning down. "Bridge? Honey, are you okay?" Bridget didn't answer. Her jaw was locked. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the doorway with a terror so raw it made my own skin prickle. The man started walking. His boots left faint, dusty impressions on the polished floor. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Every step felt abnormally loud. The guests instinctively leaned back in their chairs as he passed, a parting of the sea. My mother, recovering her senses, stood up. She smoothed the front of her skirt. "Excuse me," Diane said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "I believe you're in the wrong room. The staff entrance is around the back." The man didn't even look at her. He walked right past our table. Up close, I saw the dark circles under his eyes. I saw the exhaustion etched into the lines around his mouth. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely, utterly depleted. The little boy, however, was looking around with wide, curious eyes. He looked at me as they passed. He had a small, purplish bruise on his cheekbone, the kind kids get from running into coffee tables. Aaron stepped in front of Bridget, shielding her. His chest puffed out slightly. The wealthy man protecting his territory. "Hey, buddy," Aaron said, his voice dropping an octave into an artificial baritone. "This is a private event. You need to leave before I call security." The man stopped about 10 feet from the rattan chair. He set the boy down on his feet. The kid wobbled for a second, his light-up sneakers flashing briefly against the wood before grabbing a handful of his father's canvas jacket. "I don't want any trouble," the man said. His voice was gravelly, quiet, but it carried perfectly in the dead, silent room. "Then turn around and walk out," Arin said, taking half a step forward. The man ignored Arin completely. He looked past his shoulder, directly at my sister. "Bridget," the man said. Hearing her name in his mouth sent a shockwave through the room. Whispers ignited like dry brush. "He knows her. Who is he?" Bridget finally exhaled. It sounded like a wet gasp. "Hayes," she whispered. It was barely audible, but I read her lips. Aaron whipped his head around to look at his wife. "You know this guy?" Bridget opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked trapped, like an animal with its leg caught in a steel trap, realizing the hunter had just stepped into the clearing. "I wouldn't have come," Hayes said to Bridget, his tone devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. "I swore I wouldn't. I kept my end of the bargain. I took the money. I stayed away." A collective gasp from the Pilates moms. My mother sank back into her chair, her hand clutching her pearl necklace, as if checking to make sure it was still there. "But he had a fever for 3 days, Hayes continued, looking down at the boy. "He wouldn't eat. He just kept crying. He kept asking for you." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Asking for you." I stared at the little boy, the dark curls, the shape of his eyes. I looked back at Bridget. The resemblance hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. The kid had Bridget's chin. He had her exact nose. My mind spun backward, flipping through memories like pages in a frantic ledger. 3.5 years ago, Bridget had supposedly gone on a spiritual retreat in Sedona, Arizona. She was gone for 8 months. Mom told everyone she was finding herself. When she came back, she was thinner, quieter, and 2 months later she met Aaron at a charity gala. "What the hell is he talking about, Bridget?" Aaron's voice was rising. The patrician calm was fracturing. He looked from Hayes to the boy to his wife. "Aaron, please." Bridget choked out, finally standing up. Her legs were shaking. "He's crazy. He's a stalker. Don't do that," Hayes interrupted. His voice was suddenly hard, a steel beam dropping onto concrete. "Don't lie. Not to him. Not with him standing right here." He gestured down to the boy. The kid, the boy who had Bridget's nose, shrank back against Hayes's leg, intimidated by the sudden sharp tone. He started to whine, a high, thin sound. "Daddy, want to go." "I know, Leo." "Just a minute," Hayes said softly, stroking the boy's curly hair. "Daddy," Arin repeated. He turned fully to Bridget. His face was a mask of confusion that was rapidly morphing into horror. "Bridget, look at me. Who is this?" Bridget's chest heaved. The perfectly constructed facade, the life built on country club memberships, carefully timed pregnancies, and looking down on people like me, was cracking right down the middle. Bridget stammered. She looked at our mother. Diane was rigid, her face pale. Diane knew. I could see it in the way my mother couldn't meet Aaron's eyes. The 8-month retreat, the finding herself. Mom had brokered this. "Tell him," Hayes said, tiredly, "or I will." "He's my ex," Bridget blurted out. Tears were finally spilling over her mascara, leaving black tracks down her cheeks. "It was a mistake, Aaron. Before I met you. We were young. It was stupid." "And the kid?" Aaron demanded, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. Silence. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. "Bridget, is that your son?" Aaron asked. Bridget closed her eyes. A slow, agonizing nod. Pandemonium. It didn't explode, it hissed. The entire room erupted into frantic, hushed whispers. Chairs scraped as people physically leaned away from the front of the room, as if the lie was contagious. I sat glued to my seat. My sister, the woman who had just publicly mocked me for being 34 and alone, for failing at life's basic timeline, had a secret 3-year-old child she had traded for a hedge fund manager and a house in the suburbs. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel the sweet rush of karma I always thought I would if Bridget ever got taken down a peg. I felt sick. I looked at Leo. He was crying now, burying his face in Hayes's muddy canvas jacket. The smell of cheap laundry detergent and wet wool drifted over to me. He was just a kid who had a fever and wanted his mother, entirely unaware that his mother was currently wearing a $600 maternity dress, carrying another man's baby, terrified of acknowledging his existence. "You left him," Aaron said, putting the pieces together. His voice was hollow. "You told me you couldn't wait to be a mother. You told me." Aaron took a step back from her, bumping into the gift table. A stack of pastel gift boxes wobbled and fell to the floor with a muffled crash. "I was broke, Aaron," Bridget pleaded, reaching a hand out toward him. "Hayes was working construction. We lived in a trailer. I was depressed. I couldn't be a mother then. I made a deal with him. I gave him sole custody. I sent him money. I did the right thing." "You paid me to disappear," Hayes corrected quietly. "You paid me to pretend you died in childbirth so you wouldn't have the legal mess. But the check stopped 3 months ago, Bridge. And Leo found a picture of you in an old box." Hayes reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled, glossy photograph. He tossed it onto the floor between them. It landed face up. Even from my table, I could see it. Bridget and Hayes, younger, smiling, holding a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. Aaron stared at the photo. Then he looked at Bridget's swollen stomach. "Aaron," Bridget sobbed, taking a step toward him. "Don't touch me," Aaron snapped, flinching away from her as if she were covered in acid. My mother finally broke out of her paralysis. She rushed forward, grabbing Aaron's arm. "Aaron, please, let's go into the back room. Let's discuss this privately." "This isn't the place." "Get your hands off me, Diane!" Aaron snarled, ripping his arm away. He looked around the room, at the 30 faces staring at him with varying degrees of pity and shock. His humiliation was absolute. He turned back to Bridget. "You are sick. You are both sick." Aaron turned on his heel and walked toward the side exit. "Aaron! Wait!" Bridget screamed, stumbling after him in her heels. She caught his sleeve just as he reached the door. He didn't yell. He just looked at her hand on his sleeve and then up at her face. "I'm calling my lawyer from the car. Do not go back to the house." He pushed through the door. It slammed shut behind him. Bridget collapsed against the door frame, sliding down to the floor, weeping hysterically into her hands. The pristine white maternity dress bunched up around her knees. The room was paralyzed. No one moved to comfort her. Not her Pilates friends. Not the women she traded gossip with. They just watched her fall apart. I looked back at Hayes. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man who had just executed a dog because it was the only option left. He bent down, picked Leo up, and settled the boy on his hip. He turned to leave. Something in me snapped. I couldn't just watch this. I didn't care about Bridget's ruined marriage, but the kid was shaking. I stood up. I walked past my mother, who was hyperventilating into a napkin, and stepped into the aisle, blocking Hayes's path to the main doors. He stopped, his eyes hardening, expecting a fight. "I'm Chloe," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. "I'm her sister." Hayes tightened his grip on Leo. "I don't care who you are. Move." "I didn't know," I said. "I swear to God, none of us except my mother knew." Hayes studied my face for a long second. His posture relaxed, just a fraction. "Doesn't matter now." "Wait," I said, reaching for my purse on the table beside me. I dug past my keys and pulled out a clean, unopened packet of tissues. I held it out, not to Hayes, but to Leo. The boy looked at the packet, then up at his dad. Hayes gave a tiny nod. Leo reached out with a sticky, trembling hand and took it. "He likes dinosaurs," Hayes said softly, out of nowhere. If you ever care to know." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I care to know. Hayes gave me a single, curt nod. He stepped around me and walked out the heavy oak doors, back into the rain. The exodus was completely silent, yet deafening in its efficiency. 30 women, previously buzzing with mimosa-fueled camaraderie, synchronized their retreat. There were no hushed offers of help. No hands reached out to pat Bridget's shaking shoulders. Instead, there was the sharp clicking of clasps on leather purses, the rustle of silk scarves being hastily thrown over shoulders, and the squeak of rubber-soled designer wedges retreating toward the exits. They looked at Bridget not with sympathy, but with the cold, clinical fascination of drivers passing a multi-car pileup. She was no longer the queen of their hive. She was a liability. A cautionary tale they would dissect over $18 green juices tomorrow morning. Within 90 seconds, the room was empty, save for me, my mother, Bridget, and a lone, terrified waiter hovering near the kitchen, swinging doors, unsure if he should clear the remaining plates. The air in the room had shifted. The cloying smell of vanilla buttercream was gone, replaced by the sour tang of spilled champagne and the metallic scent of sweat. "Get up," Diane hissed. My mother was standing over Bridget, her hands gripping her pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. She wasn't looking at Bridget's tear-streaked face. She was scanning the empty tables, assessing the physical damage to her carefully constructed social standing. "Mom," Bridget sobbed, her voice muffled against her knees. She was still crumpled on the floor by the doorframe, a puddle of ruined white linen. "Aaron, he left. He drove away." "I know he drove away, Bridget. The whole eastern seaboard knows he drove away," Diane snapped, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. She reached down, grabbing Bridget by the bicep. Her manicured nails dug into my sister's pale skin. "Now get off this floor. You are ruining a $600 dress, and the staff is staring." Bridget didn't move. She just let out a long, low wail that sounded entirely unhuman. It was the sound of a foundation cracking, of a house finally collapsing in on itself. I stood 10 feet away, watching them. A bizarre, icy calm had settled over my chest. I had spent my entire adult life feeling inadequate in the face of Bridget's perfection. I had endured decades of my mother's thinly veiled disappointment. And now the curtain was pulled back. The wizard was just a terrified, selfish woman who had abandoned a toddler, and the great and powerful architect of our family was a broker of human secrets. "Leave her alone, Diane," I said. My mother whipped her head toward me, her eyes flashing. "Do not use that tone with me, Chloe. This is a crisis. We need to do damage control. I need to call Aaron's mother. We need a narrative. We can say Hayes is unwell, that the child is a relative's, that Bridget was just helping." "You brokered a child," I interrupted. The words felt heavy, jagged in my mouth. I took a step closer, my flats making a sticky sound against a patch of spilled Prosecco. "The 8 months in Sedona. The checks. You paid a man to take his son and disappear so your daughter could marry a hedge fund." "I did what I had to do to protect her future," Diane yelled, the polished veneer finally shattering. Her face flushed a deep, ugly red. She was 23. She was living in a squalid little trailer with a man who poured concrete for a living. She was depressed. She couldn't raise a child. She needed a clean break. I gave her a clean break. "You gave her a lie," I said, my voice dropping to a flat, deadpan whisper. "And you sold your grandson to buy it." "He was provided for," Diane argued, pointing a shaking finger at the empty doorway where Hayes had stood. "We sent money every single month. Good money." Until Bridget decided she was tired of paying the hush money, apparently. She shot a venomous glare down at Bridget. "I told you to set up a trust. I told you never to let the monthly transfers lapse." Bridget gasped for air, her chest heaving. "Aaron handles the accounts now," she choked out, wiping black mascara from her cheek with the back of her hand, smearing it into her hairline. "He noticed the withdrawals. I had to stop. I thought he'd figure it out." "You thought he'd just let his kids starve so you could keep playing country club?" I asked. Bridget looked up at me. There was no defiance left in her eyes, only terror. "Chloe, please, what am I going to do? Aaron is going to divorce me. He's going to take this baby." She pressed a hand to her swollen stomach. I have nothing. I looked at her. I waited for the schadenfreude to kick in. I waited for the vindication. The warm, glowing satisfaction of seeing my lifelong bully brought low. It didn't come. Instead, I just felt a profound, exhausting wave of pity. She really had nothing. She had built a castle on a swamp, and she was surprised when the walls started sinking. "You're going to need a lawyer," I said, my tone strictly practical. I reached into my purse and pulled out my car keys. They jingled loudly in the hollow room, and a very good therapist. "Where are you going?" Diane demanded, taking a step toward me. "You can't just leave. We are family. We have to stick together and fix this." "There is no fixing this, Mom," I said, turning my back on them. "You can't spackle over a missing kid. Enjoy the buttercream." I walked out. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Bridget's crying. The hallway was empty. I walked past the coat check, ignoring the bewildered attendant, and pushed through the front glass doors of the country club. The cold, damp air hit me like a slap to the face. It was still raining, a steady gray drizzle that turned the manicured lawns into dark, spongy marshes. I walked to my 10-year-old Honda Civic parked near the back of the lot. I unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. The silence inside the car was absolute. The smell of stale coffee and old paperbacks wrapped around me, familiar and safe. I put the key in the ignition but didn't turn it. I rested my forehead against the cold steering wheel. My heart was beating a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I closed my eyes, and all I could see was the little boy with the dark curls. Leo. The kid with the purplish bruise on his cheek and the faded red rain jacket. He likes dinosaurs. If you ever care to know. I sat up. I opened my purse and dug past the receipts and loose pens until I found my mother's unlocked iPhone. I had swiped it from the table during the chaos. Diane was so obsessive about being reachable that she never used a passcode. I opened her banking app. I clicked on the transfer history. It didn't take long. There were recurring payments, thousands of dollars a month, sent to an account under the name Hayes Miller. I opened her contacts, typed in the name. An address popped up. It wasn't a trailer park, but it wasn't a good neighborhood either. It was an extended stay motel right off the interstate, about 40 minutes away. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, turned the key, and put the car in drive. The motel was called the Starlight Inn, though neither stars nor light seemed to have touched the place in a decade. It was a 2-story cinder block structure, painted a peeling, bruised shade of mustard yellow. The parking lot was a patchwork of cracked asphalt and deep puddles that reflected the flickering neon sign above the office. I parked the Civic next to a rusted pickup truck that had a dented side panel and a bed full of plastic tarps and lumber. I turned off the engine and listened to the rain drumming against the roof of my car. Why was I here? What was the plan? I wasn't a savior. I wasn't good with kids. I was the 34-year-old quirky aunt who lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and ate cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. But I kept seeing that kid's face. He looked exactly like Bridget did when we were kids, before the nose job and the starvation diets. He looked like family, real family, not the curated, terrifying version my mother had constructed. I grabbed my purse, pulled my coat tight against the wind, and stepped out into the rain. The air smelled like wet dog, ozone, and cheap weed. I walked up the concrete exterior stairs to the 2nd floor. The metal railing vibrated slightly under my hand. I walked down the open-air corridor, scanning the faded brass numbers on the doors. 213. I stopped. The curtains in the window were drawn tight, but a sliver of blue light flickered from the gap. A television. I could hear the faint, high-pitched squeaks of a cartoon playing inside. I raised my fist and knocked 3 times. The cartoon went instantly mute. I heard the heavy, muffled thud of work boots crossing a carpeted floor. The deadbolt slid back with a loud clack. The door opened a few inches. Hayes stood in the gap, blocking the view into the room. He had taken off the canvas jacket. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and jeans. He stared at me. He didn't look surprised. Exactly. Just deeply, thoroughly exhausted. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the rain. "I brought back my mother's phone," I said, holding up the device. "I figured you might want to block her number, or I can throw it in the river. Either works." Hayes didn't smile, but a tiny fraction of the tension left his shoulders. He looked past me, checking the walkway to see if I had brought backup. "She didn't send you with a check?" "Diane is currently trying to convince 30 wealthy women that you are a hallucination," I said flatly. "And Bridget is crying on a hardwood floor. I came on my own." He studied my face. The rain was blowing under the awning, catching the ends of my hair, sticking it to my cheeks. I was shivering, though I tried to suppress it. "Why?" he asked. "Because I'm a cynical bitch who hates her family," I said, the truth slipping out before I could filter it. "And because you said he likes dinosaurs." Hayes held my gaze for a long, quiet moment. He was trying to figure out if I was a threat, a spy, or just collateral damage. Finally, he stepped back and pulled the door open. "Wipe your shoes," he muttered. I stepped inside. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke that had been permanently baked into the carpet, masked slightly by the sharp scent of lemon pine sol. It was cramped. 2 double beds took up most of the space. One was unmade. The other was covered in plastic dinosaur figures and a pile of coloring books. Leo was sitting on the edge of the unmade bed. He was wearing a pair of fleece pajama pants with trucks on them and a white undershirt. The purplish bruise on his cheek looked darker under the harsh fluorescent bulb of the motel lamp. He was holding a plastic T-Rex in one hand and staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. "Hey," I said, stopping a few feet away. I kept my hands out, visible, non-threatening. Leo looked at Hayes. "It's okay, buddy," Hayes said gently, closing the door behind me and locking the deadbolt. This is Chloe." "I'm your aunt," I said. The word felt strange on my tongue. Alien, but not entirely unpleasant. Leo frowned. "Like Auntie Anne's? The pretzels?" A surprised, short laugh barked out of my chest. It was the first genuine sound I'd made all day. "No, not like the pretzels, just a regular aunt. Which means I don't have rules, and I'm legally obligated to let you eat garbage if you want." Leo seemed to consider this. He held up the green plastic T-Rex. "This is Chomper." "That is an excellent name for a dinosaur," I said. I took a step closer and pointed to a triceratops lying on its side near his knee. "Who's that one?" "Spike. He's sleeping. He had a hard day." "I know the feeling, Spike," I murmured. I looked over my shoulder at Hayes. He was standing near the small kitchenette counter, arms crossed over his chest, watching us. He looked like a coiled spring, ready to snap at any sudden movement. "I'm not here to take him," I said quietly, pitching my voice so only Hayes could hear. "I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money. I live in a crappy apartment in the city. I'm just here." Hayes uncrossed his arms. He leaned his hips against the counter and rubbed a hand over his face. The sound of his rough palm against his stubble was loud in the quiet room. "I didn't want to do it," Hayes said. His voice cracked slightly. He stared down at the threadbare carpet. "The money. But he had asthma when he was born. The medical bills. I couldn't keep the heat on. Bridget's mother offered me 50 grand cash up front and 2,000 a month. She said Bridget was unstable, that she might hurt him." I felt a cold spike of fury directed at my mother. The manipulation, the absolute ruthlessness of it. "Diane lies," I said simply. "She breathes and she lies." "I thought I was doing the right thing for him," Hayes whispered, looking at Leo, who was now quietly making Chomper eat a blue crayon. "I put the money in a savings account for his school. For when he's older. I only used it for rent." But then the checks stopped, and his fever spiked. I panicked. I didn't know where else to go. "You did what you had to do," I said, and I meant it. In the span of a few hours, I had developed more respect for this muddy, exhausted man than I had ever held for Aaron and his tailored linen suits. "What happens now?" Hayes asked, looking up at me. I looked around the dingy motel room. The peeling wallpaper, the water stains on the ceiling. Then I looked at Leo, who was entirely content in his plastic prehistoric world. "Now," I said, pulling out a chair from the small, wobbly dining table and sitting down, "Arin files for divorce. Bridget probably moves back in with Diane. They will spend the next 5 years blaming each other and you and me for ruining their lives." Hayes winced. "Will they come for him?" "Diane might try, just to save face, to control the narrative," I admitted. "But she hates a mess, and a custody battle with a working-class father is terrible optics for the country club." I paused. "I can help you find a lawyer. A pro bono guy I dated a few years ago. He hates my mother almost as much as I do. It was a picture of perfect, uncurated love. It was dirty, it was messy, and it smelled like stale smoke, but it was real." "Are you hungry?" I asked suddenly, realizing my own stomach was completely hollow. The single tepid mimosa had burned off hours ago. Hayes looked at me, surprised. "There's a vending machine downstairs, or a diner across the highway." "Diner," I decided. I stood up. I walked over to the bed and looked down at my 3-year-old nephew. "Hey, Leo, do dinosaurs eat pancakes?" Leo's eyes widened. He looked up at Hayes for permission. Hayes nodded, a small, genuine smile, finally cracking through the exhaustion on his face. "Chomper likes syrup," Leo announced solemnly. "Good man," I said. I opened the motel door, letting the cold, damp air sweep away the smell of pine sol. We walked out into the rain. I didn't know how to be an aunt. I didn't know how to navigate the fallout that was currently detonating across my family's zip code. But as I walked down the metal stairs, listening to the squeak of Leo's light-up sneakers and the heavy thud of Hayes's boots behind me, I realized something. My sister had been right. I wasn't meant for the fairy tale. I was meant for the reality. And the reality, complete with bruised knees, cheap diners, and plastic dinosaurs, was infinitely better. Family secrets always have a way of digging themselves out of the grave, don't they? Sometimes the perfect picture is just a filter over a devastating truth. If you've ever had a moment where the mask slipped and reality came crashing down, drop a comment below. I'd love to read your stories. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this. Share this with someone who loves a little drama, and subscribe so you never miss a story.